Thursday. Before I get started on my video, I just wanted to show you something in my classroom. I loved last year showing off some of the wacky things that I have in my classroom, and because none of you are here, I can't do any of that, and it makes me sad. So on this Thursday, when I'm sure you're feeling the stress of trying to get this whole week of work done, I just wanted to take a break and show this to you really quick. This is called a tongue drum. I got it for Christmas last year. And as you can see, the top is carved into tongues of slightly different sizes. You've got a hole in the back where the sound comes out. And if you hit with a soft mallet, these tongues, they produce tones. Right? So you can hit it in really any way that you want, and the sound is always going to sound good because the tones work really well together. So you can hit just any of them randomly, and it sounds good and it sounds peaceful and soft. And so I just wanted to show that to you. I have some wacky percussion instruments just hanging around, so that was my show and tell for today. So anyway, I wanted to share this video with you. This shouldn't be too long, but in this English 3 class, as I've mentioned before, we read American literature, and we read the American literature in context of what was happening during the time that it was written. So it's also based a lot on American history. And I want us to ask ourselves both easy and tough questions when we're reading these texts to get a better understanding of how to appreciate and view these texts. So let me give you some examples of some of the questions I want you to ask. Some of them, like I said, are very straightforward, right? Who's the storyteller here? Who's the author, right? So if we have Christopher Columbus, for example, giving us accounts of what it was like to step foot onto American soil, right? Even though he thought it was India. There's some issues there, right? First of all, he thought he was in a completely different place, and he wasn't. So sometimes what a person does or does not know can get in the way of their account, right? Also, every single person in the world, forever and always, has had biases, and biases are what we are comfortable and uncomfortable with based off of how we grew up and and what we have seen in the world and what we have experienced in the world, right? And so if you have someone coming into a place they've never been before and they don't understand the culture of the people that they inhabit, what sort of biases can come out on the sides of the story, right? So that's what's really important about the Who, right? And why do they get to tell the story? I mean, we're going to be reading some documents that are hundreds of years old at this point. Why did their accounts of what happened remain? Were there other accounts that we don't know about because people didn't deem them important, or they got lost, or they just got buried through time, right? So that's another important question to ask. How does the time the text was written in affect the narrative and language? You all know that some texts that were even written like 60 years ago or so use language that we don't use anymore, right? So how does it affect the word choice that people are using and its acceptability of those word choices? Who is the story about, and what is the story about? What's the focus? What was the storyteller interested in telling you about? Who is the intended audience for this text? Um, in America, there was a long period of time where Black Americans, for instance, were not allowed to read. So were they ever really the intended audience for written work? If it comes from that time, the answer is probably no, right? They either couldn't read because they were never able to learn, or they read in secret and the texts still weren't for them, right? So who was supposed to be reading this? Who were they trying to get to read this work, right? How does this text affect our understanding of American history? What does it add to your understanding of American history? Um, you guys had an American history class last year, I believe, if you went here, and there's so much to cover, right? And you can't cover it all. And so how do these texts help you learn more about American history? Whose views are represented and whose are not, right? Some people in certain parts of our history are viewed as better than other people, and through time, these things can shift. But who who felt it was important to be represented, and who was just kind of shoved to the side? That's another important question to ask. What is deflected, diminished, or deleted? Deflected means that you kind of turn to a different point of view, right? Oh, we're not going to talk about that. We're going to talk about this instead. Diminished means that you're still talking about something, but you're making it seem smaller than it is. And deleted is when you just get rid of something entirely, right? So was that happening in any of these texts? And then how do the ideas in this text affect me or our present world? Even though we'll be reading texts from hundreds of years ago, it doesn't mean that these texts are no longer useful or meaningful to how we live our present day lives, right? Some of the issues that we're going through today and over the summer and for the past several years now can be traced back a really long time. Some of the issues we face currently were things that we've been facing for a really long time. And so these texts can help shed light on some of those things. So that's just what I want you to be thinking about when we start reading these texts. I know some of them are going to not be the most easy to read. I don't want that to discourage you. I'm going to show you some examples of text that we will be reading. And even if there's a couple words you have to look up or you don't understand every single word in the text, I think you'll still be able to get the gist, the main point of it. And that's what matters the most, right? So let me show you what I mean by that. Let me zoom in here. Okay, so how should we read these text excerpts? I found some text excerpts from Christopher Columbus's log, where he was writing down what it was like to arrive and meet who we now call Native Americans or Native people. He called them Indians because he literally thought he was in India, so that was an error. So he refers to them as Indians. He also refers to them as savages, which we can talk more about later. But let me just read some of the things that he was sharing. In his log, he said, and he's talking about the Native Americans here, they willingly traded everything they owned. They were well built, with good bodies and handsome features. They do not bear arms, and do not know them, for I showed them a sword. They took it by the edge and cut themselves out of ignorance. They would make fine servants. With 50 men, we could subjugate them all and make them do whatever we want. And that's from 1492. And that's when he met, let me get the right name here. Make sure I'm not spitting falsities. That's when he met the Arawak men and women when he first arrived in the Bahama Islands. Okay, that was his impression of them. He then wrote letters back to the court in Madrid because he was getting paid to come over and explore. They wanted to find gold, they wanted to find spices and things like that. And so he was writing back to the court, hoping that they would give him more money to continue exploring. And he wrote, the Indians are so wild and free with their possessions that no one who has not witnessed them would believe it. When you ask for something they have, they never say no. And that connects back to what he was writing about in his log. These people who were already living there, they had communities that were very communal, which means as far as owning things, that didn't really happen. I mean, a whole community would really own something, right? So I mean, several people would live in a single large house. Everyone shared their food. Everyone shared things that they needed to hunt. And so that was just what their society was like. And Christopher Columbus didn't know that when he first arrived. He was just so amazed that they were willing to give him anything. And that was not like his own experience in his own culture, where ownership was very important, where property owning was very important. And so he was like, wow, they'll give us anything. This is amazing. And it leads his mind to say, we can easily take them over. They don't have guns like us. They won't put up a fight. We can own them, right? His mind is thinking about property. His mind is thinking about ownership. And that's where his mind goes, because that's the culture he grew up in, right? But he puts this ignorance on those other people, not knowing how they live their lives, not knowing what their culture is, right? So we've got these biases coming in as well. We've got a culture clash and we have bias, right? The last excerpt here is very religious sounding. Christopher Columbus was a very religious man when he was writing. And he said, "Thus the eternal God, our Lord, gives victory to those who follow his way over apparent impossibilities." And that was also to his report to the court in Madrid. What he's basically saying here is God is giving us what we need. He is gifting us with these people that we can take on as slaves because we believe in him, because we follow his rule, because we love him. And so when the Native Americans didn't believe in the same God as Christopher Columbus, he took that to mean that they were lesser than, that they were savages, and that he could take them over, and that this was a gift from God, right? To Christopher Columbus, he was saying, this means I'm doing the right thing, and God is granting me all this fortune, right? So when we read these texts, sometimes they're hard to read. And we need to always go back to these questions here, right? Who's the storyteller? Why do they get to tell a story? How does the time it was written in affect the language that they use? What is deflected, diminished, or deleted? Whose views are represented and whose are not, right? We don't get the other perspective in this case, right? It's Christopher Columbus's perspective on what happened. We don't get to hear the other side in this case because one side is represented and the other is not. So I'm going to give us, many more texts throughout the year, obviously, as an English class. And I want you to always keep your eye on this. This is going to still stay in our Google Classroom. You can download this and look back on it if you want. But these are the questions that I want us to focus on when we are reading primary documents, especially that relate back to historical moments in our past. Okay? Anyway, that's all I have for you today. Definitely check out the food for thought paragraph for tomorrow. I'm taking that as a CATS quiz. I'm not asking you to have anything that we've done over the week memorized or anything like that. I just want to see how you write a paragraph, okay? So try your best on it. Be thoughtful. Make sure you use complete sentences. And I can't wait to see what you've written. Anyway, thank you. Bye.